One, after all the suggestions of self-reflection, what would they do after the election, the Democrats? It seems that the answer is triple down on transgender ideology, on the suppression of free speech. Everywhere you turn right now, complete panic mode, cornered, dying animal. From Axios to CNN, they are going to attack free speech, they're going to attack Elon Musk, and they are attacking X. 2, DOGE. What kind of cuts can we expect? Is it real? And President Donald Trump promises tariffs on Mexico and Canada with Professor Peter St Onge. 3, maybe J.D. Vance was right. Maybe Democrats are the party of single, lonely cat ladies. So says the Washington Examiner's Conn Carroll. It is the Will Cain Show, streaming live at foxnews.com, on the Fox News YouTube channel and the Fox News Facebook page. Terrestrial radio, coast to coast, but always on demand by subscribing on Apple or on Spotify. You can also join us every Monday through Thursday live at Fox News Facebook or Fox News YouTube. You can set a reminder and you can jump into the comments section. You can become a member of the Willisha by subscribing to the Will Cain Show on YouTube. Speaking of comments, fellas, we have a lot today from the commentariat on CNN and from the National Press Club. They're ready to attack Elon Musk. They're ready to attack free speech. They're ready to attack X. I think that we have to be able to execute the process of deduction. We have to use reason and logic. The true attack is on you. The true attack is on your mind. But there's also comments in regards to yesterday's show. I'm not bragging. I'm really not. This is not the whole, lesson of the last 10 years, scream your successes and pound your chest. I'm really humbled, really. On Thanksgiving, I'm going to spend some time grateful. And I'm just so, tickled to see what's happened with the Willisha, with our audience. I mean, we did 160,000 yesterday on YouTube, and we've been averaging, we talked in our pre-show meeting, well over 150,000 over the last 3 weeks, and that's taking out what we did during election week. We've seen record numbers of subscribers on Spotify and YouTube, the podcast, and it feels like this thing that we've been in on together, the four of us, and also the OGs out there who've been with the Will Cain Show, watching and listening. It just feels like we've built something. It's happening. It's happening. So we're all grateful and tickled to death. I did get a comment last week talking about our show. I was talking about Demon Copperhead and my recommendation during Will's Rabbit Hole that everyone should read Demon Copperhead. And I made the mistake, and it truly is a mistake, of saying how incredible this author is, Barbara Kingsolver, because she's like, I don't know, in her 60s, and she's writing in the voice of an 11-year-old man. Yeah. And we had an email in from a longtime OG, very upset with me for describing a 60-something-year-old woman as an old lady. And as I get older, trust me, my definition of what is young gets older. But if you can please, and I know that we have an interesting audience that really spans generations, truly does. And by the way, genders. We have young people with us on YouTube. We have older people with us on Spotify and Apple. And I love them all. And so please don't be insulted that I said a 60-something-year-old woman was an old lady. I don't think that. I mean, hell, I'm a 49-year-old man. But it's actually a compliment. How is this 60-year-old woman writing in the voice of an 11-year-old boy? 2 days, you're reading Demon Copperhead?
I am. I started it. I'm on chapter 6 now. Yeah, it's pretty good. It's
Isn't it incredible?
I don't know where it's going.
Written?
Yeah, it's really, really interesting. And that whole area of the country is just something I don't know a lot about. So it's pretty fascinating.
Appalachia. Mm-hmm. And speaking of comments, yesterday's episode here of the Will Cain Show, I revisited my weekend of the 2024 Squirrel Hunt and Catfish Rodeo. I should say I did see the comments on Instagram. I did see some of the comments during the show from YouTube. Here's what I find fascinating. There's a little bit of an avulsion to hunting squirrels, but there's no love for the catfish. And same with Peanut the squirrel, the travesty of the New York Department of Environmental Nazis taking down Peanut the squirrel. There was no love for Frank the raccoon. Like, he is a footnote in history. All the love for Peanut the squirrel. So my question for you three is, why squirrels? Why do squirrels receive protected status? It's a game animal. People hunt squirrels. So what's the love affair with squirrels?
I was very surprised to see all the comments and just being like, can you not talk about killing squirrels? There are so many of them, and I never think twice about them. I may have killed more than you did last weekend just with my car in my lifetime, which I feel bad about. But you know what happens.
Yeah, but the number of squirrels that you see running fence lines and in treetops compared to the number that are roadkill, they're survivors, man.
Yeah,
There's not many getting hit by cars, percentage-wise for the population. Here's my theory. It's the tail. It's the twitchy, furry tail. Because the difference between a squirrel and a rat is the tail.
People have pet
it
squirrels
truly
too.
is.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, they're rodents, and that nasty, hairless, long tail on the rat is a real personality killer for the rat, which are really smart animals.
I think you nailed
Pigs, donkeys, rats. Yeah, it's the tail, man. That's what's caused the love affair with the squirrel. And by the way, speaking of comments, there's also there's a debate raging, and you guys have it. What is the debate that is, speaking of Elon Musk and X and free speech, here is an exercise in free speech taking place on X. You guys have this debate. Before we get into substance today, we got to deal with this conversation. And it's put out originally by someone under the handle Dog Mom. Dogs should be allowed everywhere as long as they are trained and well-behaved, period. To that, the Daily Wire's Matt Walsh says, no, nope, absolutely not, and also hell no. Dogs are not people. If you want to have your dog in your house or bring him to a place meant for dogs, that's fine. You cannot force the rest of us to be around your dog in places that are not meant for animals. There are millions of examples of such places in a civilized society. If you want to live in a place where animals and humans cohabitate in virtually all public spaces, go to a third world country. It's right up your alley from the sound of it. By the way, I've been to Greece. I mean, and Central America. Dogs and people are absolutely cohabitating in some of these third world countries. Now, here at the show, we have both sides of the debate, right? So two-a-days, you're pro-dog every environment.
Yep. Pro-dog every environment. I have one word for Matt Walsh on this take, which is
wrong.
I mean,
wrong.
You heard it from the man himself.
Yep.
I think dogs should be everywhere. There should be more dogs and less people. That's just my opinion.
Would you be okay with having Violet in your studio mid-show?
Yes. The only thing is Violet is a violent shaker, meaning when she wants to like shake her ears out and she's got her collar on, she's a violent shaker. So you guys would hear the jingle jangle of her,
I love
her
that
collar too often.
That would work.
I love that.
And tinfoil, you're incredibly anti-dog. You hate dogs.
I'm not quite in Matt Walsh's vein, but yeah, I'm not. I just don't really want to be places where there's all the dog dander and the drool, and especially like if you're eating food, like you're in a restaurant. I can't stand going to a restaurant and there's being dogs there.
My trust level of tinfoil just went down a little bit.
That's an L take, but
Would you guess that Donald Trump is a dog guy? I don't think so.
I don't think
Not
so.
Trump.
I doubt it.
I think he'd be on the side of Matt Walsh.
He's a little.
Here's where I
needs
am.
To be clean.
Yeah. I am a violator, but I'm also Switzerland. So, at various times in my life, I've definitely been a violator. Like when I was in college, I had a Doberman, Leon. He was incredible. And he went everywhere with me. There was no place I thought if I could go, he could go. And that was everywhere. Now, this dog was basically a human. I mean, he was so smart and loyal and minded me. And Dog Mom in her post on X did say that, as long as it's well-behaved. I'd take him to, frat parties, and it was awesome, man, off the leash. He'd just wander the party and check in with me every 5 minutes. But Violet, a little more impulsive. I don't take her everywhere. And what I would say is, if it's an outdoor place, like an outdoor bar, you got some cornhole going, you've got picnic tables with beers, your dog can go. But I'm with tinfoil on indoor. No, not indoor. Indoors for your house, your office if you own the office. This is the liberty of
what about
being
service animals?
A proprietor. You can take your dog.
No service animals.
Yeah. Well, but the definition of the service animal has been totally destroyed. You guys know this. I know people.
I know.
Sitting with their dogs on planes.
I said that facetiously because
I'm like, what's the malady? Emotional stress?
I love that.
At this point, I don't even know everything.
Emotional support pig.
We used to do that in college. You'd go to the college doctor, be like, "Oh, I need an emotional support dog," and then they'd sign off for you, and you'd be allowed to have a dog all of a sudden. It's great.
It's totally abused. It's been. This is like the wheelchairs on Southwest Airlines. Okay, you guys are walking, 50% of the path. You're just using this to get up in front of the boarding process. What is this? This is the definition of the problem of America. You make laws and rules. We can't even quantify the number of laws that we have. And then because you have so many laws that you have to create so many exceptions, and then people take advantage of the exception. Then you got a class of people who the law doesn't apply to. You make a rule. It's just like parenting. You make a rule, you stick with the rule. That's it.
Does.
It's a hard rule. You make not very many. Hard, few rules. That's the best way to govern a society. All right. You can jump into the comment section there on YouTube and Facebook. Let us know what you think about dogs in public places. But this all originated on X, and there is an attack on X. But it's not just on X. There's an attack on Elon Musk. But it's not just an attack on Elon Musk. Yeah, okay, it's an attack on free speech, which by extension an attack on you. But really, it's an attack on your thoughts. It's an attack on your mind. Let's get into that with story number one. Jim Vandehei, one of the proprietors, founders, along with Mike Allen of Axios, originally Politico, then Axios, was awarded something by the National Press Club. I say something because I don't know the award that he received, and I don't care the award that he received. But I know they gave him a podium and a microphone, and he went off about journalists, media, and X. Listen, watch.
Everything we do is under fire. Elon Musk sits on Twitter every day, or X today, saying like, we are the media, you are the media. My message to Elon Musk is, bullshit, you're not the media. You having a blue check mark, a Twitter handle, and 300 words of cleverness doesn't make you a reporter. You don't do that by popping off on Twitter. You don't do that by having an opinion. You do it by doing the hard work.
The arrogance, the anger, the condescension, and all so nakedly unearned. I don't care how many medals you place around each other's necks. All so nakedly unearned. I don't care whether or not you call yourself a reporter. I care about the truth. And the people that have been the self-knighted arbiters of truth have been nothing but propagandists and liars. Let's be clear. The vast majority of you are liars in media. Do we have to rattle off the examples of what burns your credibility? You have to make a list, and I promise you it won't be exhaustive, but we can start with COVID. Masks help stop the spread. Vaccines helping stop the spread. Vaccines stop transmission. Vaccines have no negative health effect on children. Vaccines are necessary for children when you do the statistical of risk of what COVID does to a child versus the potentiality risk of a vaccine to a child. School closures, origins of COVID. Lie. Let's move to another category. Trump, Russiagate, one of the biggest hoaxes perpetuated over the last decade, for which, by the way, Jim Vandehei, you guys awarded each other Pulitzers. You hardworking reporters awarded yourself the highest honor in quote-unquote journalism for a fake story with Russia. Oh, how about Russia putting bounties on American soldiers with the thumbs up from Donald Trump? How about very fine people? How about bloodbath? How about dictator for a day? How about Kamala is the greatest thing since sliced bread simply 3 weeks after she was an incompetent vice president, according to everyone? How about Joe Biden's not senile? Oh, he's sharp as a tack, on top of the game. How about war? How about all wars? How about the Iraq invasion? How about what's going on in Ukraine? How about every single war? Lie, and more lies. And today, what you want to do is you want to go after X. And of course, because really the only guiding light for the hardworking reporter in the media is a Democratic talking point, I give you a former sports reporter who's got her marching orders and knows how to march to the beat of the drum on CNN. Watch Carrie Champion debating Scott Jennings.
Platforms are not regulated right now, which gives them carte blanche to whatever they want right now. Elon is not someone who likes to be regulated. And so to buy MSN, he would go under some federal regulations.
Who's regulating CNN right now?
The FCC.
We're not a broadcast. It's cable.
I mean, I don't really think cable stations are under the same regulatory structure
over public airwaves.
that broadcast is.
It's definitely regulated more than than Facebook and Twitter.
Okay, that first clip wasn't Carrie Champion. I don't know who that was. Guys, do you know who that clip is? Because I have an observation on that part of the debate. Do you know who that is debating with Scott Jennings and Jim Garrity from National Review in that clip? Anyone back there in New York?
I'm not sure. It up.
It looked like a lot of people were on vacation on that.
I do have a lot
of new faces.
I do have the Carrie Champion video if you want that as well.
Well, but hold on. I'm fascinated by something even in this clip. What you have to notice, what's going on here is what they have mastered is the pretense, the costume of authority. And it's in like a matter of less than a dozen words, Garrity and Jennings undress the costume of condescension and authority. They say, hey, do you realize cable channels aren't regulated under the FCC the same way that broadcast licenses are? That's NBC, CBS, and ABC. It's because those broadcast channels are over public airwaves, licensed by the FCC, so you have to serve, as the regulation reads, the public interest. But she doesn't know that. She doesn't know the difference between ABC, CBS, NBC, and Fox, MSNBC, and CNN, which are cable channels. You can see it's writ all over her face. She's like, what are they talking about? I don't know what they're talking about. I'm confused here. And then she goes, well, it would be more regulated than X. I just want to tell you, the emperor has no clothes. They can give each other awards. They can act condescending with authority, but the emperor has no clothes. Not only are they liars, they're idiots. They don't know what they're talking about. And then a former colleague of mine at ESPN, Carrie Champion, jumps into the debate with Scott Jennings.
What she's saying is that there's still a litmus test of journalism that you have to pass. You can't come on TV and just make up things and say things. That happens on X. Please don't give me the eyebrow furrow as if you don't know what I'm talking about. It happens often on X. I can go and say the color is blue and I will be met with so many disrespectful remarks. No one's regulating the N-word. No one's regulating the criticism. No one is regulating how people are treated.
How much government regulation of the First Amendment are you for?
Let me tell you something. If I came on here and I just started calling you all kind of names, do you think the bosses would let me continue to do that?
I mean, it happens to me occasionally. I don't know if you watch the show.
It doesn't happen to you, but it doesn't happen for me. And I know that I wouldn't be able to do that. There's a level of professionalism in what we do here because we are journalists and we adhere to something, at least morally. And there is no moral compass on this thing called.
It's all a straw man. There is no moral compass on CNN or MSNBC. There's no greater obligation to the truth. She has no understanding of the First Amendment, or if she does, she has complete antipathy towards the First Amendment. Again, perfectly undressed in less than a dozen words by Scott Jennings. How much regulation of the First Amendment do you want? And the truth is, she wants all of it for you. But the audience doesn't want that. The audience wants exposure, transparency, sunlight, and as much information as possible. And that's why you can see just alone in cable news, you can see the following of what's going on. This is last Thursday night. I just want you to see this because it's pretty stunning. For the first time that I can remember, Fox News has 70% of the cable news audience. Let me just share with you Jesse Waters. Jesse Waters Primetime got 3.5 million people on Thursday night, 400,000 in the demographic. For all the talk of how old cable news is, and percentage-wise, that's a little over 10% of the audience. But 400,000 in the demo is a great number. All in with Chris Hayes, 74,000 in the demo, 822,000 total. Anderson Cooper, 99,000 in the demographic, which, by the way, is 25 to 54 years old. 500,000 overall. 500,000 for Anderson Cooper. It's the same at 10 p.m. Eastern Time with Gutfeld, Ingram, Hannity. 70% of the audience going to Fox News. If you combine CNN and MSNBC, triple their numbers, they don't reach the numbers of Fox News. Meanwhile, while they're debating what to be done about the media because they can't control the narrative, here's what's happening in the real world. Donald Trump last night announced tariffs on Mexico and Canada. He put this out on Truth Social. As everyone is aware, Thousands of people are pouring through Mexico and Canada, bringing crime and drugs at levels never seen before. Right now, a caravan coming from Mexico composed of thousands of people seems to be unstoppable in its quest to come through our country. On January 20th, as one of my first executive orders, I will sign necessary documents to charge Mexico and Canada a 25% tariff on all products coming into the United States and its ridiculous open borders. This tariff will remain in effect until such time as drugs, in particular fentanyl, and illegal aliens stop this invasion of our country. He goes on in a two-part post to say, until such time, I will also be charging China an additional 10% tariff above any additional tariffs on any products coming into the United States of America. Thank you for your attention to this matter. End it like a business meeting. Thank you for your attention to this matter. New tariffs. Also, while this is happening, is military recruitment, according to Senator Bill Hagerty of Tennessee. Re-enlistments on the up with the nomination of Pete Hegseth to Secretary of Defense. And oh, by the way, Jack Smith has filed to vacate all court dates for hearings when it comes to the 2020 election case, and the classified documents case in Florida has been dropped. Jack Smith is soon to be a footnote in history, and the prosecutions of Donald Trump are nakedly now exposed to be nothing but an attack on your political opponent. You knowing those three things I just gave you, the dropping of all cases against Donald Trump, all federal cases against Donald Trump, military recruitment up under the nominee for Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, and tariffs imposed by Donald Trump to stop the flow of illegal aliens and fentanyl, all those three things that you now understand that I've shared with you are the reason that they want to control Elon Musk, control X, control free speech, and control your mind. Let's get into all of that, including what can DOGE do to cut fat, inefficient government spending and the effects of tariffs. Could they replace the income tax in America? Coming up with Professor Peter St Onge on The Will Cain Show. Would tariffs stop Mexico and Canada from allowing illegal aliens and fentanyl to flow into our borders, into our United States of America? Would tariffs cause massive inflation in America? Could tariffs replace the income tax in the USA? It's The Will Cain Show, streaming live at foxnews.com, on the Fox News YouTube channel and the Fox News Facebook page. Always on demand. Just subscribe on Apple or Spotify, or you're joining us every Monday through Thursday on Facebook and YouTube to become a member of the Willisha. As several people today are already chiming in. Suzanne says, Tinfoil Pat gives me cat vibes. But Tinfoil, you do, and I don't think we can bring him up right now 2 days, but he does give cat vibes. And can we just ask him? I don't know if he can chime in.
He's there.
We have a guest getting ready to join us.
Unmute yourself,
on his
Patrick.
Zoom. Does he have a cat? Can you ask him, Tinfoil? Can you ask him 2 days?
Oh, he does.
But I don't like the
there
cat.
it is.
Of course you don't like the cat.
Yeah.
I don't really like. I'm not an animal guy.
Ugh.
You don't like people, animals, cats, dogs. You don't like
I'm a
living
lone
creatures.
wolf.
What do you like?
I'm a Sigma.
Do you? No. You like your kids?
I like my
You
kids.
like your
Yeah.
kids, I
That's
hope.
about
Yeah, I was going to say.
Yeah.
He's a Sigma. Deb Lee says on YouTube, people have allergies. Dogs just cannot be everywhere. Hold on a second says, save a squirrel, eat a peacock. I want a pet peacock. There are a few things that I want. I want a pet peacock. I want to get some land for this to be the case, but I want a pet. My grandma used to have peacocks in her neighborhood, and it's just such a fun surprise. Hey, look, there's a peacock. And I want a donkey. I love donkeys. Big fan of the donkey. And then JD from South Carolina says, we're about to be in World War III, and they're worried about dogs, LOL. I don't know if he's talking about the people on X or if he's talking about the Will Cain Show. But welcome, JD from South Carolina. Welcome to the Will Cain Show, where we will talk about something very serious. And we will also, as you would with your friends, I hope you wouldn't dominate your Thanksgiving dinner 100% of the time talking about World War III, which deserves attention, and we need to talk about what's going on in Eastern Europe. But I hope you wouldn't dominate your conversation every time somebody switches to, do you like stuffing or dressing? That you're like, we're about to be in World War III. This show's a little different. We have real conversations of every stripe here on the Will Cain Show. But we do need to get into some of these serious things. And how about the economy? Let's get into that with Professor Peter St Onge. He's an economist who hosts the Peter St Onge Ph.D. Podcast. He's also a visiting fellow at the Heritage Institute. Prof. Peter, what's up?
Peter works. How you doing, Will? It's good to see you again.
Good to see you. Let's start with tariffs. Let's start with the news last night from Donald Trump. We have talked about this. There's been discussion, will he impose like wide-ranging tariffs, perhaps to supplant the income tax or become our primary form of taxation? He's actually alluded to that. Will he use them as a tool, a geopolitical tool to get policies done on the foreign stage, like what he suggested here? Mexico, control the border, or you're going to get a big tariff. China, control fentanyl, or you're going to get a big tariff. What do you think about Trump's use of tariffs?
Yeah, I think that captures it. He's in a no-lose situation. Okay, so he can threaten the tariffs. A lot of these countries, the amount that they export to the U.S. is a huge part of their economy. Okay, so to illustrate, Canada exports about 1/5 of its GDP to the U.S. All right, we have them by the balls. We export about 1% of our GDP to Canada. Mexico is even more extreme. Mexico exports 29% of everything they produce, right? So 29% of the jobs in Mexico depend on exporting to the U.S. For us, it's 1%. So every single one of these countries, when they talk about retaliation, it's a joke. They're not going to win. They're going to fold. And, as Trump often talks about, there's a lot of countries in the world that mistreat us. They take advantage of us. The traditional approach, whether it's Republican or Democrat, has been to shovel trillions of dollars at these people and somehow hope that they're going to like us again. So we've been doing that to the Europeans, with NATO, of course, with Ukraine nowadays. We saw it with Biden shoveling money to Iran and they were supposed to like us. So Trump is saying enough with the carrots. It's bleeding us dry. It's not working. We're going to flip to the sticks. And the fact of the matter is that we have much bigger sticks than any other country in the world. These countries will dance for us. It's just a question of time.
And we've already seen that with Mexico. The president of Mexico has already made sounds and noises about stopping a caravan that's currently moving through Mexico. She's already somewhat bent to the will of the promise of Donald Trump. So they work. Now, you said an interesting thing. That was fascinating what you told us about the economic comparisons on exports. Because one of the things that's always been said is economic wars lead to real wars. So tariffs are essentially, what I've heard this, and you may have made this argument in the past, tariffs can be a form of warfare, and they lead to that. Famously, what not a lot of people understand is prior to Japan attacking the United States at Pearl Harbor, the United States had begun to place, I believe, economic sanctions on Japan in form of oil imports. We started to really ratchet up problems for Japan on the domestic economic front, which many say forced their hand. Like it really was the first domino that led to Japan's overt act of war towards America. Now, no one's worried about that with Mexico or Canada. But you notably, I heard you, Professor, left out China. Talk to me about exports and imports with China. And, I imagine your stats are going to be a little different. And do you think that's a threat that leads to potential real war?
Yeah, it's not as far off with China. So China exports about 19% of their GDP to us. We exported about 9% back to them. We do actually sell a lot more stuff in China because it's huge. Also because China really can't grow its own food. And so they depend on America farming, which by far it's the highest quality. If you go out to Asia, they consider American food to be premium. So it's high in quality. It's also extraordinarily cheap. So China absolutely depends on our food, which leads to the question, a back and forth trade war between China and the US, that's kind of the worst case scenario, right? We can live without Mexico. We can live without Europe. They can't live without us, but we can live without them. China is the one that's tricky because we have chased off so much of our manufacturing base that almost any product you make in the world either depends on China for its supply chain, or it's something that we've already isolated, like in the defense production chain, where it is just absurd. I mean, like 10x, 28x expensive. All right. And you can't do that for the rest of the economy. We would be completely bankrupt. So China is a little bit trickier. And, I think the Trump team is aware of this. And he's more, I think, looking at China to use these tariffs to start pressuring them. We've been trying for a couple of years now to try to friendshore, try to bring some of that production back towards countries that are more reliable for us, countries that might treat us better on trade. But that is a long road. That's something that you have to do gradually. Now, fortunately, if we start chipping away at our dependence on China, in theory, China can see it coming and maybe they cause problems along the way, but they won't, because we are 1/5 of their exports, we're 1/5 of their entire economy's exports to the US. Also, China has its own problems right now. So they've kind of screwed the pooch on the economy. President Xi is not the miracle boy that China used to have in its presidents. Growth is around 4 or 5%, which is very disappointing for a generation of Chinese who thought that they were going to catch up in another 10, 20 years. So China cannot afford trade friction with the US. They'll basically do what we say and they'll constantly try to dial it down. They might talk big, but they're not going to act big. The reason is because if they do, they will get tens of thousands of really rioters running around their country because their company is folded, because they've lost their jobs. Last year, they had a number of bank problems where banks were not handing out money because they had problems in the loans that they'd made, and so they didn't have the cash. And China actually brought out the tanks. They were like driving the tanks around banks, warning people, don't get too loud here, right? China's got a lot of domestic internal problems. The people who run China right now, they're of the generation that lived through the Cultural Revolution. In the Cultural Revolution, they were throwing government bureaucrats, senior bureaucrats, out of windows. It was like BLM on steroids, just the violence that this sort of woke crowds exhibited in the Cultural Revolution. They are very afraid of their people. So China is not going to pick a fight.
So they don't want to get an economic trade war with America. Because the real risk is on the domestic front, what happens with their people if they start losing American production. I'm curious, you told us the 9% that America exports to China it sounded like what you said is primarily food-based exports on our behalf. The 19% of their economy that is exported to America, is that primarily American companies manufacturing in China as opposed to domestic Chinese companies? In other words, even the 20% of their economy that is being exported to us, that's fed by us, I would assume, through American companies offshoring their manufacturing.
Right. A big chunk of it is being exported by U.S. companies. Of course, if you've got a U.S. company that's producing everything in China, that has a relatively muted impact, right? I mean, the shareholders are going to be European and Japanese and Americans. So it's not that sort of translates it back into American production. But in terms of goods, right, what we're sending to China is food, aircraft, and industrial machinery. What they're sending to us, that's top three. Top three are electronics, machines, furniture, and bedding. Those are the top three in terms of value. Of course, anybody can walk into a Walmart and you can see that essentially all of the consumer products are produced in China.
Right.
Now, almost all of those things, especially the simpler ones, those have actually been leaving China because China is getting expensive now because it's developing. So a lot of that production actually nowadays, it comes from Vietnam, India, Ethiopia is big in clothes. So it's not as difficult to replace China as it used to be. But nonetheless, in the short term, if you completely stop trade between China and the U.S., that would be very disruptive. It will look like the supply chain crisis that we had a couple of years ago.
Okay. What about the idea of inflation? There are those making the arguments. Now we're moving beyond tariffs as a tool to affect policy, like what Trump has talked about here with fentanyl and open borders and illegal aliens. But instead, tariffs as a primary form of taxation. The counter argument, which right now is being made by the left, but if you and I are being intellectually honest, consistent, and fair, has been made in the past by conservatives and libertarians, is that that's inflationary. That a tariff tax goes to the corporation passes that along to the consumer in the form of rising prices. They will raise the price of whatever it is, those consumer goods you just rattled off, bedding, clothes. if we impose tariffs, we're just going to see the price of bedding and clothes and electronics go up 25%.
Yeah, so you've got two mechanics going on in inflation. You've got what's happening in the short run, and then you've got what's happening in the long run. In the short run, if you slap a, let's say, 20% tariff on something, and if that thing is only imported from that country, then it'll go up roughly 20%. It was a little bit special in Trump 1.0, where China actually compensated the tariffs to exporters because they wanted to hold on to market share, right? So there's estimates of that, something like up to 80% of the tariffs were actually paid by China, which is very nice of them. But they're not going to continue that in the long run because it's very expensive. So in the short run, yes, you get a boost. In the real world, there are other countries that produce the thing. You can produce it domestically. You might be looking at a 5 or 10% boost, depending on the product. The thing is that when you zoom out from that, that's going to be inflation, in other words, a higher price for that specific product. But when you zoom out to the entire economy, inflation across the entire economy is a function of how much money is in existence. So how many goods are there and how much money is chasing those goods. So that 5 or 10% in socks is going to be overwhelmed by what's happening over on this other side with the Fed, with government spending, with DOGE. So if those things, if we're bringing down how much the federal government spends, therefore how much the Fed is creating, that is going to absolutely overwhelm whatever's happening in tariffs.
Okay, we're going to get to DOGE in just one moment. But one more question on tariffs. Trump has made the argument that for a full embrace of tariffs, and even, at least toyed around. This is what he does, though. He brainstorms out loud about replacing income tax with tariffs. First of all, that would take an act of Congress, right? It would take income tax is a constitutional amendment as well. So it would take an alteration of I believe, isn't it the 19th Amendment, where we put in place the powers of the federal government to institute an income tax. That doesn't mean they have to, by the way, I don't think. I think it just gives them the power to do so. But I don't know the math on that. I don't know. You couldn't tariff your way out of the income tax in terms of what we need to pay for what we spend. Now, you can say, and we'll get to this, you and I, in a minute, let's reduce what we spend. But is there any realistic path? We've done this for I remember when I first got into this, it was like there was Herman Cain, 999, right? There's been simple tax, fair tax. Rick Perry used to say, Governor of Texas, when he ran for president the first time around, your tax return should fit on a postcard, right? It should be, and I agree with that. The complexity of the income tax is obscene. But is there anything to be said here for a different form of taxation over income tax?
Yeah, so as you say, the 16th authorized an income tax, but of course it didn't require it. There's also a fun detail that, so the government can pass a tax on bubblegum wrappers in your car. Okay, they're allowed to do that. However, you don't have to tell the government how many bubblegum wrappers are in your car, right? So the government is free to pass an income tax. It's an open question. Do you have to tell the government how much money you made? So that's kind of a fascinating question that deals with the Fourth Amendment, that, you have the right to privacy unless they have probable cause of a crime. Also the Fifth Amendment on self-incrimination, but that's sort of a fun aside. Fundamentally, if we're looking at a situation where you are reducing the income tax or getting rid of it altogether and trying to replace that with tariffs, so the income tax currently collects about $2.5 trillion. And tariffs, given what we're currently importing, those might collect 600 or 900 billion, right? So you got about a $1.5 trillion gap. Now, I think that's fantastic. We should just stick with that and cut government spending by $1.5 trillion. But if you were to do that, a couple interesting things happen. So first of all, the income tax is very, very destructive in terms of how much it destroys for every dollar it collects. So when you raise the income tax, like if you've got a small business and you're paying 40% of everything you earn, remember, if you lose money, the government's not pitching in. You lose alone in the dark. If you gain, the government's going to come and grab half of that. People dial it down. They don't open a second restaurant. They don't take on more work. If you're a consultant, you say, I'm just going to work 20 hours a week. This is good enough. If you're facing a 40% tax rate, a lot of economic activity does not happen. And the estimates of that is that for every $1 they collect in taxes, they destroy, they light on fire another $3 worth of economic activity. So the income tax is extraordinarily destructive. It's taking $2.5 trillion, yes, but it's also destroying $7.5 trillion on the way out. It's like if you sell a piece of furniture and they come and collect the furniture with a backhoe and knock out your entire front of your house to come collect it. On the other hand, a tariff looks a lot like a sales tax. It's a sales tax that targets foreigners. You don't have incentive effects. You have some distortion of the economy. It's nowhere near 1 for 3. So you put those together, and if you were to take $2.5 trillion income tax and replace that with tariffs that are 1/3 as big, so $900 billion, you'd be looking back of the envelope, just on those numbers, you'd be looking at about a 20% jump in GDP. If you translate that into a regular household, the median household in the U.S. makes $75,000 a year. They would get a $15,000 raise. They would be paying, remember, they wouldn't be paying income tax, so they would save $18,000 in the income tax, and then they'd be paying maybe $3 or $6 in the tariffs. You net that out, and they'd be looking at something like prices. A $30,000 raise, so about $2,500 a month.
Interesting. So that means to me, so Phil Kerpen, who's a writer, he tweeted this out to Elon and Vivek. He said, of potential interest, a few years ago, the economists at Law and Economics estimated that the average full-time employee in a federal regulatory agency destroys 135 private sector jobs per year. So you just told us about what government spending does to the private sector. Now we're getting to kind of the role of DOGE, exactly what it can do in terms of reducing federal workforce. And according to Law and Economics here, as quoted by Phil Kerpen, and this is focused on regulatory jobs, right? A regulatory job, one, full-time, destroys 135 private sector jobs. Does that make sense to you, Professor Peter St Onge?
It does. I love that number. I'm doing a video on that next week, Will. That's fantastic.
You are? Okay. We need
to
make sure we check that out.
That's exactly the point. So like when we're talking about getting rid of government workers, I don't care about their salaries. I mean, I do. It's unjust. It costs a lot of money. It's not their six-figure salaries that bother me. It's exactly what you say. They are like a nuclear weapon for jobs.
Interesting. Okay, I want to share this as well. You put this out. You corrected yourself, so we'll get to your correction here in just a second.
Yep.
But you said, talking about the potential for DOGE, right, to make government cuts. Speaking of where you put out your videos, you put them out on X. Everyone can check them out. They get a lot of views. They get retweets from Elon Musk and so forth. You can check them out at Prof. St Onge, O-N-G-E, on X. So you tweeted out, you posted on X, they're handing Trump a lit fuse on a $36 trillion debt crisis. The Biden administration added $12 trillion of debt. Interest payments now consume $1 in $4 collected. Under Trump, it was half of that. DOGE has a deep hole to dig out of. You issued a correction. I think you were community noted, or Musk jumped in, that the $12 trillion was a little high. But you addressed it, which I appreciate, which I also found enlightening. It turns out that the Biden administration is responsible for about $9 trillion in growth over the last 4 years. Trump did jump it up. Is it roughly $3 trillion or so in the last year and a half? Basically COVID. And we all remember, there's the stimulus checks, COVID checks, that kind of thing. I have it up on my screen here in the Will Cain Show studios. This is the federal debt to total public debt. And let's just go back to 2020, pre-COVID. It was at about 23 trillion, right? Is that what it is at that point? And now we're sitting at 35. Is that where we are? About 35 trillion. So it is a $12 trillion jump. And you can see the quick jump during COVID. But you're pointing out two things. This is a ticking time bomb. $1 in $4 going to interest on the federal debt. And also, leads us to the conversation of DOGE. What can actually be done by Musk and Ramaswamy?
Yeah, so there's a long history of trying to get rid of waste and fraud in Washington. It's sort of what politicians go to when they run out of ideas. So Al Gore was going to have the Waste Commission. He kept bringing out props of ashtrays that cost $10,000. It's got a long history, and it never goes anywhere because they identify a bunch of stupid spending. Everybody has a good laugh. They get rid of that. They cut like 0.1% of the budget, and everybody calls it a day. What I think is interesting about DOGE is that Elon and Vivek are two of the smartest people in the entire country, but certainly in public service, where low IQs are normal. And they've identified what I'm calling the the exhaust vents on the Death Star. Okay, the exact way to go after this. Now, back up for a sec. DOGE has enormous public support. So it's got over 70% support. This was a recent poll out just a couple days ago. 63% of Kamala voters support DOGE. All right, there's an absolute consensus in this country that government is
How do you
out of
not,
control.
in theory?
Yeah.
Yeah. Every American, I
Right.
would think, in theory, supports the idea of more efficient government.
Right. Yeah. There's been polls from Gallup where on average, Americans think that 51 cents on their tax dollar goes to either waste or fraud. I mean, there is a deep national consensus that the federal government is broken, is way too big, it needs to shrink. So Elon has floated $2 trillion in spending. That would be about 1/3 of the budget. The easy parts are there's between 300 and 500 billion in waste. That's according to the Congressional Budget Office. That's Congress's bookkeepers. Heritage Foundation has estimated another 300 billion in corporate welfare, including the Inflation Reduction Act. That was pure corporate welfare. It was actually rebranded. Like, you can literally see it on Congress's website. It was called Build Back Better, and then they called it Inflation Reduction. And they can get away with that, of course, because the lapdog media played along. But anyway, pure corporate welfare. So about $1 trillion of that is pretty easy to cut. Now, what do you do with the rest of it? And here's where the cleverness comes in. So Supreme Court had a couple decisions last year, Loper Bright and West Virginia v. EPA. And those two decisions basically said that you've got all these hundreds of thousands of rules that the federal government imposes on us. Almost none of them have been passed by Congress. Now, it's very, very clear in the Constitution, every law has to be passed by Congress. And these rules have the force of law. They will put you in a cage if you violate them. They are laws, by all accounts. And so the Loper Bright and EPA said, no, these are legitimate. Now, at that point, people on the right, conservative groups, they started launching lawsuit by lawsuit, challenging these rules one by one. Well, what Elon and Vivek are saying is, you know what? We're going to fulfill the will of the Supreme Court. We're not going to disregard them like Joe Biden did. We're going to go ahead and do just what the Supreme Court told us, which is that we are going to nullify, we're going to pause every single regulation that was not passed by Congress, which in theory,
this is Chevron.
There's at least 4,000 rules passed a year. An estimated 50 are actually passed by Congress. That's 99%
incredible
of the control they have over the economy. Yeah. They say we're going to nullify those. We are going to then look at the ones that are more complicated, and we're going to see whether to get rid of them forever. Now, what happens if you do that is that you shrink entire agencies. You lay off potentially tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of bureaucrats who don't have anything to do anymore. Trump has something called he's got authority to force reduce, to lay off government workers if they're not needed. He can't go after them because they tweeted something about him. All right, that's retaliation. Maybe he can. That's yet to be litigated. That's a constitutional issue. But if he doesn't need them anymore, that's well established. You can get rid of them. You can get rid of them, and then you got a bunch of money left over. And so then there's a question. It's something called impoundment. Does that money revert back to Treasury? And they're going to definitely litigate that. But the end result is that if you can get rid of 50 or 80 or 90% of the regulations, and that then takes out a huge chunk of bureaucrats, that money goes automatically to the Treasury. But more important, what it does, what you're saying about the one regulator killing 135 jobs, it takes those people out, right? Those are the super spreaders of economic catastrophe. Those are the specific ones that it takes out. It's not necessarily going after mail carriers. It's going after EPA regulators who, harass a small machine shop in Wisconsin because it's got a pond in front of it. Those are the people who it gets rid of. So you get this massive economic boost that gives us a fighting chance of getting out of the Biden recession before it even begins.
to your point, they did this during the Reagan administration. Tom Coburn, former senator from Oklahoma, used to do this on a yearly basis, talk about ways to reduce government spending. It never did amount to much. We hope that DOGE will. I appreciate you bringing up the Chevron deference case that from the Supreme Court, which says that what you pointed out, that so many laws and regulations aren't even things approved by Congress, but it's deference to powers of the administrative state, truly the deep state, to regulate everything in our country. This is the opportunity. This is the opportunity for DOGE. All right, you go enjoy your vape, Professor Peter St Onge. You didn't sneak that.
How could
that
you
wasn't
tell
smooth.
I was doing it in secret, Will?
Because doing this and not coughing is very, very suspect. Trust me, from a nicotine addict, I got all the tells down. You go enjoy your vape. The rest of you can enjoy his videos on X or his show, the Peter St Onge Ph.D. Podcast. Always fascinating. Love having you on the show, Peter St Onge. Thank you, Professor.
All right. Thank you, Will.
All right. By the way, Ronnie over on YouTube, I believe, could have been on Facebook, says, to all the cat ladies that are Republican, thank you for staying a cat lady. Maybe a cat man will walk into your life. Well, Ronnie, we appreciate you being a part of the Will Cain Show. You should hang around because I've got somebody coming up that says, you may not be, you may be on the left, and we appreciate you watching the Will Cain Show, but you might be on the right. And if you're a cat lady on the right, well, you are a unicorn. That's coming up on the Will Cain Show. The Democratic Party left, as predicted by J.D. Vance, with nothing but cat ladies. It's the Will Cain Show, streaming live at foxnews.com, on the Fox News YouTube channel and the Fox News Facebook page. That's where you find us every Monday through Thursday, 12 o'clock Eastern Time, live. But as we've seen and mentioned, audience growing exponentially. You can always catch the Will Cain Show whenever you want. You go over to YouTube and subscribe to the show. You can catch us after the fact because a lot of people are watching. I don't know. What do we are? A good half of the audience continue to watch throughout the day here on the Will Cain Show. Same thing on Spotify and Apple if you're listening on terrestrial radio. It's just a massive community that we're building here. And by the way, the community's chimed in 2 days. We asked at the outset of the show something about dogs and this whole debate of dogs in public spaces. What'd you ask the audience what they have to say?
It's created quite the debate in the chat on both sides. But we did a poll question, should dogs be allowed in public spaces? Public meaning where the public are, not exactly private, everywhere. And people said yes, dogs should be allowed in public spaces. 63% said yes, 37% said no.
We're a dog society.
We're a dog society.
We've moved to a dog society.
Yeah.
It's comforting to hear.
We're going away for Thanksgiving. I told you my Thanksgiving is like 20, 25 people, stepsisters, brothers and sisters, significant others.
Imagine the political combos.
Husbands, wives. We're going to Oklahoma. No, I told you yesterday, or maybe I didn't tell you. I was on Fearless. Tommy Lahren is Fearless on Outkick. And because this whole thing about will the libs in your family decline Thanksgiving? Out of 25, I think I said 2.5. Two on the left, one, I don't know, kind of maybe on the left. They're all coming. But you know what's not allowed to come to Thanksgiving? Pets. My mom put the rule. We're going to southern Oklahoma. We're all staying in the mountains up there. Mountains of Oklahoma. But no pets are allowed. And one thing that surprised me is why would a cat person even need that instruction? You don't travel with your cat. Like a dog, yeah, okay, but
you haven't met the right cat people. Some do.
Like that. What do you do? Put it on a leash?
Yeah, I have friends that go hiking with their cat on a leash.
Get out of here!
I swear, I will send you a picture.
Like a Tasmanian devil on the end of a string. That's what that feels like. Yeah. That's. How do you even discipline or train a cat? I don't know. Speaking of cats, let's talk about cat ladies. Conn Carroll has a book out. It's entitled Sex and the Citizen, How the Assault on Marriage is Destroying Democracy. He also has a column up at the Washington Examiner where he talks about J.D. Vance's infamous Conn saying what everyone said, this could cost him the election, that the left is populated by childless cat ladies. You dug into it. You dug into the election results, and you're saying he was right, J.D. Vance.
Of course he was right. How could he not be? No, but look, if you look at the exit polls, it's very clear. Married men went for Trump, 60 to 38%. Married women went for Trump, 51 to 48%. And this is all married women, not just married white women, All married women went for Trump, 51% to 48%. Unmarried men went for Trump, 49% to 47%. The only demographic that went for the Democrats and Kamala Harris were unmarried women.
And they went for Kamala Harris plus 21. So the numbers you just gave us: married men for Trump plus 22, married women plus 3, unmarried men plus 2, but unmarried women, this is your point about the childless cat lady, plus 21 for Kamala Harris.
Yep. And then the reason why it's so close on top of that is because traditionally, and this is true this year, unmarried women go to the polls in much larger numbers than unmarried men. So, for example, this year, only 20% of the electorate was unmarried men compared to 27% of the electorate that was unmarried women.
That was 2024, Con?
Yeah, that was this year.
And what was it in the past? Like, what was the gulf between unmarried women and unmarried men at the polls in the past?
It's always about the same. Unmarried women have for decades outperformed men at the polls. What was different this year, and it's quite striking, kind of feeds into the topic of my book on the decline of marriage. This was the first year ever that more unmarried women went to the polls than married women. So that was a change, in that unmarried women actually outnumbered married women for the first time, which reflects the continued decline of marriage. As I point out in my book, from the very first census up until 1960, 80% of all households in the nation were led by a married couple. That number hit 50% in 2010. We've still been shrinking. It's down to 45% today. So unfortunately, the married family is disappearing.
80% of households were married in 1960. We're down to 45% today.
Yep. It's a huge cultural change that is often ignored, is not talked about, which is part of the reason I wrote the book.
Yeah, I mean, that is foundational. That's earthquake. That's shattering. That's what that is, to see a society's marriage rates drop almost by 50%.
Yeah, I totally agree. It is changing every part of our society, and a lot of people just don't realize yet that the data is there when you look at literally any problem, whether it's income inequality, wealth equality, crime, polarization, isolation, loneliness. These are all being driven by the decline of marriage.
Why have we seen marriage crater like this? By the way, we're not alone, are we? Like, this has happened in Japan, I believe. I know that, at least anecdotally, that it's happened in Japan.
So there are other countries that have problems with declining fertility. Okay. But the United States leads the league in the decline of marriage, unfortunately. The other thing we lead the league in is multi-partner fertility. So it's very rare in other countries for there to have an unmarried mother in the first place. But then once you have that, for then her to have multiple fathers for multiple children. We are by far the leaders in the world on that.
Why is this happening, Con, in America?
Sure. Well, as I detail in my book, so the book itself is actually a centuries-spanning, millennia-spanning history of marriage, going back to the dawn of humanity, and then the dawn of civilization, up through Christianity, the readoption of monogamy, the founding of the nation. And, as I said before, from the first census up until the 1960s, marriage was the foundational unit of civil society. There was an American family consensus that ruled in this country for almost 200 years. But then what happened is you had this intellectual drift from the understanding that monogamy was essential. And so this started with, I detail, Jean-Jacques Rousseau and John Stuart Mill, but then you get Margaret Mead, an anthropologist, coming in, and Alfred Kinsey, and you just get this cultural relativism building, so that in the 1870s, you had the Supreme Court say that we are a Christian nation, and Congress has absolute authority to smack down the Mormon Church and take their property and completely outlaw them in order to maintain monogamous marriage. Fast forward to 1940, and all of a sudden you have a Democratic appointed member of the Supreme Court saying, monogamy, polygamy, they're both different lifestyles. It's fine. And that was in a dissent at the time. But then as you reach the late 1960s into the 70s, then you have the Supreme Court in three specific cases just totally casting aside marriage is the foundation of society and going with, the individual and the 14th Amendment and protecting just individual rights as a foundation, not the married family. And so from there, you have the rest of family law falling apart.
Well, that's family law. You're focusing there on the role of the law in the Supreme Court. But to me, the cultural shift is also important in there and obvious. And it may be a correlation, but I've got to think and at least be a curious person and explore the idea that, well, the rise starting in the 1960s and 70s is also the rise of the feminist movement. And look, I want everybody to make their career choice what they want. But when women started placing, it seemed to be that career became as important as family building for many women. And I can draw those lines that you just said. Like that, those two things are basically direct correlations, direct line right there. The rise of women in the workforce and the decline of family probably, I'm just picturing that graph in my head, Conn. That's got to be lockstep.
So I would say you're half right. Yes, there has been a increase of women's workforce participation, and especially when it comes to professions that require education, that does push marriage backwards for a lot of women. But when you look at the marriage rates for college educated, they're pretty much living in the 1950s. Okay. Yes, they're getting married. What? Yes, they're getting.
I said, is that right? So
yeah. Go ahead.
Working women are still building families.
Well, working college educated women are still building founders. They're doing it later, which does reduce their fertility rates, but they are still forming families. What you saw in the late 1960s into the 1970s was just a complete collapse among non-college educated women, with non-college educated workers, and that kind of family formation. So the first Supreme Court case I talk about is King versus Smith. And so this is a case out of Alabama that got rid of so-called man in the house rules. So before this, states could go in and say, look, if you are sleeping with a man, okay, you are disqualified, from this program. And the Supreme Court said, no, you can't do that anymore. You can't disqualify a child from this program just because it's out of wedlock or the mom is sleeping with someone else, which meant that the only way a mother could be disqualified from the program is if she actually married the man she wanted to be with. So you have two equal couples, one that is just cohabitating and not married, they would qualify for welfare. And after this decision in King v. Smith, the married couple would not. So this created marriage penalties for the entire welfare system. Now, Democrats will come back and say, Democrats come back and say, look, AFDC, which is now TANF, is such a small program. Very few people actually get direct welfare payments. And that's true. However, what they leave out is the tremendous expansion of the rest of the social safety net. Food stamps, Section 8 housing, Medicaid, Obamacare subsidies. All of those are means tested and have marriage penalties included in them. All totaled, the federal government, combined with state governments, spend over $1 trillion every year punishing marriage. And so in the decade after that 1968 King v. Smith decision, that is when you saw the bottom just fall out of African-American households first. And the reason why that is because Black women were, like everyone else, forced to choose between a man who had a job or a government check. And unfortunately, because of racism, we're talking about 1960s America, African-American men were just a less likely bet to be a stable provider than government. So that's why you saw the marriage rates fall off for that community first. But then as you've had illegal immigration, as you've had China shade stocks, then you've had wages for the rest of the unskilled workers, white, Hispanic, also fall. And then you've seen marriage fall accordingly. So there's definitely a cultural element here, but a lot of this is being driven by both the marriage welfare policies and the economics of men not being able to provide, not being able to outcompete government as a marriage partner.
Fascinating. Okay, so first of all, on the cultural front, what you said shouldn't come as a surprise to me now. What's his name? His name is escaping my attention, but the guy who was famously canceled for writing The Bell Curve. What's the author's name?
Charles Murray, yes.
Charles Murray wrote about this in Coming Apart, a later book that he wrote, talking about that, the whole image of the 1980s divorce, and we talk about the divorce rate. It is actually wealthy people put out an image of careerism and divorce and so forth, but it was not them who adopted it. They continued to live, like you said, in the 1950s, while poorer sections of our country, and he focused on that book, not on African Americans, but he focused on, like the book I was talking about earlier, like Demon Copperhead, like Appalachia lower class whites adopted those social mores. They adopted what was put out by Hollywood and popular culture of, no, you don't need to be married or whatever. But what you're saying about replacing the head of the household from a man to a government is pretty fascinating through the expansion of the welfare state, because that's a correlation as well. We can see the expansion of the social safety net starting in the 1960s, 70s forward, and that correlates directly to the destruction of the family. Now,
yeah, and that line's going to be a lot more.
Go ahead.
I said, and that line's going to be a lot more clear than women's employment. The expansion of the safety net and means tested program is much more causational than women working.
Has that now been? Look, I truly don't think, but I haven't read if we rewound history and I dug deep into the 1960s and 70s, there was a conspiratorial effort on behalf of Democrats or whoever was pushing the war on poverty, which is launched there by LBJ, and then you have the social safety net. I don't think there was let's destroy the family. But I do think that Democrats moving forward have seen what you pointed out, unmarried women plus 21 Kamala Harris. They've seen that the family is a dividing line. Do you think there's an overt antagonism among modern-day Democrats, either culturally or policy-wise, or pure Machiavellian for electoral politics of antipathy towards the family?
The short answer is no on the politics on the politics front. I don't think that they're trying to purposefully get more single women so they can dominate politically. I do think that there is definitely a feminist line of thinking that the decline of marriage is good for women. As I quote in my book, there's a book called by a feminist named Hannah Rosen. It's called, I swear to God, I did not make this up. Her book is titled The End of Men. And she talks about how essential the decline of marriage is for the professional success of women. Okay, because when you have marriage decline, women feel freer to have temporary relationships, as she called it, to meet their, physical intimacy needs, while they can go out and get an education and then a career. And so for her, the decline of marriage and the rise of hookup culture, the whole chapter in the book is defending hookup culture, is about how wonderful it is and how women need that in order to live their best professional lives, which, of course, as we've seen, is bad for the rest of us.
Do you finally on this? So, when I see these stats and I see about the unmarried women, going heavily to Kamala Trump, but every other demographic going toward, including unmarried men going towards Trump, it does make me think about, all right, you're targeting something here, and maybe inadvertently or maybe overtly, you're targeting something that is foundational, not to America, but to human civilization. That's the creation of the family. But it seems to, with this election, Con, run into the divide between status and aspiration. So in other words, even though there's these people that are unmarried, they don't have this antipathy towards marriage like you just pointed out in that feminist book. They're still aspirational towards marriage. I don't know. There's something, no matter how much you shake the snow globe and you rock the foundations, there's something innate in us as human beings that want to build this. And as long as you're tapping into that aspiration, those are people that want to build families. And if that means voting for a Republican, that's what they'll do in terms of policies that help you build a family.
No, I think you're exactly right. I think that's why Trump was able to do so historically well with Hispanic men and Black men, right? Because the Democratic Party has no place for these men. It doesn't offer them anything. Only the Republican Party says, look, we want you to be the best provider and protectors you can be for your family. We want you to get married. We want you to be the leader of your household, to provide and protect for your wife and your children. And that's all what Black and Latino men want, is they want to be good husbands to their wife and child. And, it's only the Republican Party that is saying, yeah, look, we are going to try to create the jobs necessary to give you the ability to provide and protect for a woman and so she can be your wife and you can have children with her.
It's absolutely fascinating. The book is Sex and the Citizen, How the Assault on Marriage is Destroying Democracy. The author is Conn Carroll. He has a column up. You can read it at least in part or condensed, very, very condensed version at the Washington Examiner. But I encourage you to check out the book, sex, and the citizen. Conn, what an awesome discussion. Thanks so much for jumping on today on the Will Cain Show.
Thank you so much, Will.
All right. It's been a long time. I've known Conn for a long time. We used to appear together on The Blaze. It's good to see him again. I think, if I remember correctly, he has something like, 10 kids, which puts him in the Rachel Campos-Duffy range of procreation. Who, by the way, will be on our show tomorrow as our special Thanksgiving edition of the Will Cain Show. We'll get you set up with traditions, games, things to be thankful for. Also, by the way, college football. We got to get all that in tomorrow. So you get your drive to Thanksgiving dinner all set here with the Will Cain Show. I'll see you again next time.